As a young boy, I grew up knowing about the loss of the Newquay Lifeboat James Stephens No'5 on the 17th of December 1917. My dad, also called Len Shepherd, although only a young lad himself, aged just 15, was one of those who scaled down the cliff to the survivors washed into the tea caverns below the Atlantic Hotel. In particular, he remembered taking a bottle of rum or brandy to his grandmother's cousin, Captain James Papin. It was a terrible night, he recalled, and clambering down the cliff was dangerous. But he was used to it, as during wartime he and his mate Len Clemens collected gulls' eggs from the cliff, supplementing their family's food resources. The following provides a summary of that disastrous night over 100 years ago. On the night of Sunday the 16th of December 1917, a ferocious storm from the northeast had hit the north coast of Cornwall. A steamship, the SS Osten, lying off Penhale Point, had developed engine problems and sent up a distress flare. Coastal communities at that time had large numbers of family involved in the maritime trade and at sea. The lives of seamen were important. After all, one day it could be their nearest and dearest who may need help. The Newquay Rocket Brigade had been called out and they stood ready, should the ship be driven ashore. On the Monday morning the lifeboat signals were fired and the lifeboat crew were assembled. The coxswain John Delbridge, after assessing the situation with the launch committee, said the conditions were too rough to launch a lifeboat. With the ship drifting nearer the shore, the feelings of the local community were that a rescue should be attempted, and former coxswain James Gill, after gaining agreement from the second coxswain Richard Trebilcock, offered to take a volunteer crew. 12 men volunteered to man the lifeboat, one man short of a full crew. The crew consisted of James Gill, coxswain, Richard Trebilcock, second coxswain, John Clemens, Reg Pearce, F. Pearce, R. Woodward, W. J. Grigg, Steve Hoare, Archer Thuey, Joseph Hicks, Thomas Hicks and James Papin. The James Stephens No'5 was launched and cleared the slip to tremendous cheers from the onlooking crowds, and she appeared to be weathering the heavy seas well. Captain Papin expressed fears that she would not clear the Dane Rock, but after being hit twice by large waves she had righted herself. Then disaster. A huge wave caught her, slewing around, only for her to be hit by another great wave, heeling her right over. With the sails in the water and preventing her from righting, she was swept towards the tea caverns. Both James Gill and Captain James Papin had been thrown overboard. Gill swam strongly for the shore and Captain Papin was washed into a sandy cove. The crowd of onlookers on the cliff tops moaned and screamed in disbelief as potential tragedy unfolded. Men and boys procured ropes and climbed down the cliff face to attempt a rescue of the men. By this time the sails and masts of the James Stephens No'5 had cleared themselves of the water and the vessel, now righted, had washed into the tea caverns. Men still aboard clambered onto the rocks at the base of the cliff. Some were badly injured and others only just made it when the vessel slipped away. The James Stephens No'5 was eventually battered to pieces and sank amongst the rocks. With the assistance of the crowd and several bottles of brandy, some of the crew were taken to the Atlantic Hotel for first aid. Although no one lost their lives, there were some serious injuries. The men were declared heroes and all received a certificate, a medal and war bonds from a public collection. Subscribers to the collection also included the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VIII. RNLI medals were issued to James Gill, who received a certificate in vellum and a silver medal. Richard Trebilcock received a certificate in vellum and a bronze medal. Recollections from that event are shared here in an interview to Chris Blount by May and Elsie Chappell, who were young girls at that time and witnessed the event.
Mrs. Clemens came up to me that day. She said, Miss Chappell, she said, I call it wicked, those men going out into this weather. And see what the sea is like. Oh, the sea was terrible. Our husband was one of them. You see, we always had the rockets to go off. So I said to Mother, I said, can I go on the headland to see the boat? We knew that 'twas the wreck somewhere. And yes, she said, but you must find somebody to go with. Well, we had Mrs. Clemens. Well, we went up, and that boat
was out on the
the-
slipway,
ready
waiting
to
to
go
have the
down.
pin knocked out before it went down the slip.
we were there waiting a long time before the
From
boat
about-
was ever put off.
From about 11 and 10:30 to about 12 o'clock.
Every few minutes, oh, she's going down now. We're going to put her down. Well, she never went down for hours. The boat went down, and just as she got to the bottom of the slip, a huge wave came and took the lot of them. And all those men were out in the sea. I saw that, and we said, come on, we'll go home.
And the boat was smacked up.
Oh, yes. The lifeboat was broken up as well, like matchwood, and you could see all the pieces floating out on the water. We watched everything. I was younger then. And Mrs. Clemens was there with me. Oh, she said, Miss Chapel, she said, I don't know, what are they going to do? We were all very upset because it was a terrible sight to see. See all those men out in that rough sea floating like corks.
They'd been taken out from the lifeboat and they went up around that little cove. You know, there's a cove on the right-hand side as you go down the slipway. Well, they were all washed up there. Some had cut heads and some had cut faces and arms.
And we only had jingles in those days for anyone in trouble.
They were taken up in jingles
Yes, that's what I've never said.
to Miss True's nursing home, which is the
over opposite.
Newquay Hotel.
Did they all get ashore?
Yes,
Yes,
nobody was
none-
drowned.
But one of them, poor old Mr. Pierce, he was always a bit funny afterwards.
Oh, well.
He was hit hard. Oh, well, yes, and Johnny Clemens, he went by in a jingle and his head was bound up in bandages because he was bleeding so. He must have had a nasty hit, but he got over it. They all got over it. It was a miracle.
On the 17th December 2017, the loss of the James Stephens No'5 and the heroism of the crew was commemorated. Outside the old lifeboat station on Town Head, a good crowd of local Newquay folk attended a service of remembrance. Many people present had relatives who were associated with the activities of that day 100 years previously.